Hello everyone, welcome to the English version of Mauricio's channel. My name is Paola and I will be Mauricio's voice in English. I know, my voice doesn't sound any close to his, but it's all there is. As you can notice, I am not an English native speaker, so please forgive any mistake I can make and correct it kindly. Now, let's start. In today's video, we will analyze the flood story, which you can find in the book of Genesis in the Bible. The goal is to determine if it was a historical fact or just a mythological story. Before starting, just a clarification. All the biblical references mentioned here will be from the book of Genesis, and in order to avoid confusions with the many biblical versions, we will use the online Bible from the website www.ids.org. Now, we can start. The first step is to know the features of the ark God asked Noah to build. We find that information in verses 14, 15, and 16 from chapter 6. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. Okay, so we have that the ark was built in a wood from a tree today we're not able to identify as gopher, so we don't know the physical features of that wood. A substance named pitch was used, I assume, to waterproof the ark, since using glue to join a structure of such dimensions is incoherent. The glue should be 1,000 times more resistant than any other glue today, and should be produced in industrial amounts. The ark dimensions are determined in cubits. We don't have the precise equivalence for that measurement, but we can assume a cubit is around 18 inches or 45 centimeters, since if bigger, the construction is less probable, and if smaller, the load capacity is less. We also know the ark's inside had 3 levels, and the only entry to the inside were a window on the high side and the entry door on a side of the ark. Chapter 7, verse 4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. So, Noah had 7 days to build the ark, and that ark should be totally independent for at least 40 days. Now, let's see what was the load composed by. Chapter 6, verse 18. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives, with thee. Chapter 6, verse 21. And take thou unto thee of all the food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Chapter 7, verse 2. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Okay, so in the ark there should be 8 people, 7 couples from each clean animal species, and 1 couple from each non-clean animal species, plus all the necessary for everyone to keep being alive after the journey. But how long would last that journey? Chapter 7, verse 11 says this. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Chapter 8, verse 14. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, was the earth dried. These clearly shown dates present a year and 10 days gap. The first challenge Noah had in order to build his ark was how to get and transport all the necessary wood to the building place, considering that besides the ark's wood, he would need wood for the brackets, scaffolds, and cranes. We can suppose that in Noah's courtyard was growing a whole forest of trees from a single species that was perfect to build a boat. That way, he would save a lot of work transporting the wood. We don't know the tree species, so we can't calculate with certainty how many trees Noah required, but regardless the size, we're talking about tens of thousands of chopped down trees. Here, a question arises. Who chopped those trees down? Noah could have counted on thousands of friends who knew how to use an axe, but based on the story context, it looks like Noah wasn't very popular. But he did count on God's support, who in his omnipotence could order some animal species to do the work, rodents, birds, insects, etc., for instance. Regardless the species, it required hundreds of thousands or even millions of individuals. Once he had all the necessary chopped down trees, he needed to peel them and cut them in thick planks with very specific dimensions, a job that could also be done by rodents, birds, or insects, but with the urgency of having only 7 days to finish the construction, there should have been tens of millions of animals involved in this task. While these animals were preparing the wood, Noah should start the setup of the scaffolds and the cranes, for which he required a lot of strength and precision. For this task, the only animal I can think about that could help him is the elephant, since it can lift a lot of weight with its trunk and place it accurately, so there should be an army of elephants helping him. There's a problem here. How to join all the pieces? For the scaffolding, some simple ties with leather could work, but joining with leather ties the pieces in a crane that will have to lift many tons, it will break for sure. To solve this problem, it comes to my mind ironwork, like the ones you see on wine barrels. But now there's another challenge for Noah. He needs to extract iron from the ground, clean it, melt it, and shape it. Tasks no animal could have helped with without using any tool. The tools should have been obtained through the same process. We can conclude that the ark couldn't have been built without a significant amount of workers and specialized tools. Of course, we could say that God could have given the wood ready to Noah, the crane, the ironwork, the tools, but what's the point for ordering Noah to build an ark when God could have created it with a finger snap? Let's suppose Noah could build the ark and he's ready to load the animals and the food for them, just as God asked him. At this point appears the doubt about how the endemic animals could get to the place where Noah set sail, especially those animals who were tens of thousands of miles away. But I guess God, with his or her omnipresence, could gather centuries in advance all the animals who would get in the ark. It is estimated that in the planet's history, around 2,970 millions of species have been extinguished. To imagine that all of them had the chance to get in the ark would imply an ark with the size of a city such as New York. So God must have counted on a very specific criteria in order to save only the species we have today. But questions arise, such as, why didn't he let any dinosaur get in? Many people said that happened because of their big size, but there were dinosaurs with the size of a pig. Why didn't God let get in primates such as the Australopithecus, Gigantopithecus, Paranthropus, Sahelanthropus, among others? But he did let the orangutan, the gorilla, the chimpanzee, and the human get in. Not to mention the giant insects, 3-meter worms, 50-centimeter dragonflies. It could be because God knew beforehand that these animals wouldn't survive in the present conditions of the planet. But why saving elephants and not the mammoth? Why saving the Bengal tiger and not the saber-toothed tiger? I guess this is one of the questions I will ask God if I bump into him one day. To continue, let's calculate quickly the lower volume of the Ark, 135 meters long, 443 feet approximately, 23 meters wide, 75 feet approximately, and 14 meters tall, 46 feet approximately. That makes a total volume of 43,470 cubic meters. Now, I want to calculate how many people could survive with that air volume trapped for 40 days, which is the time the flood lasts. The average person in calm consumes 2.5 liters of air per inhalation, doing around 6 inhalations per minute, which implies that in 40 days, one single person consumes 860 cubic meters of air. Since we count on a total volume of 43,470 cubic meters, the amount of people that could survive enclosed in the Ark would be around 50, amount that decreases if we count the wood framework of the ship, the 3 floors in which it's divided, and the problem that the carbon dioxide gets concentrated above and the oxygen downwards. But let's assume it's 50 people. Noah and his family make 8 people, at least 2 elephants, who consume the air of 20 people. At this point, I just have mentioned 2 species, and more than half of the air in the Ark is consumed. What would happen if, besides the animals, we loaded food and water for everybody? Well, after 40 days, the only thing alive would be bacteria and parasites. In order to solve this inconvenience, we could make the Ark much bigger, the size of the Titanic, for instance. Of course, somebody could say the global flood didn't happen because of the rain, but because some water was underground and came to the surface. That way, our Ark could lack a roof and let everybody breathe freely. But the Bible, being the only document inspired by God, and he in turn claiming the flood was a flood, that person would fall into a mistake, opening the door to doubts like if David really killed Goliath, or if Moses could really divide the sea waters, or if Jesus really resurrected. Now that we have a giant Ark where everybody can breathe, locked for 40 days, there are other problems. The water could be carried, only that I can think about in which kind of containers. But animals that drink water are animals that need to urinate. Thousands and thousands of liters per day of urine, which during the first 40 days should be stored in the boat. If we add thousands of daily kilos of excrement, flatulences rich in methane, the environment would be unbearable. Besides, there wouldn't be light inside the Ark, and obviously they were not as stupid to light a torch inside a wooden enclosure with methane in the air, and limited oxygen. There's also the problem of the animals that eat other animals. Lacking of refrigerators, the animals destined to be food should be kept alive, and for that they needed additional food and water. I also have to mention the scavenging animals, but that complicates everything more. Considering this, I've been told that at that moment every animal was vegetarian, which would solve the living food problem, but would make the methane flatulence problem worse. In order to solve this, I can think all the animals, once the Ark was locked by God, got in a hibernation of at least 40 days, so they would avoid the urine, the poo, and the flatulences. They could also avoid to load water by collecting water from the ocean once the 40 days had passed, because it would be just sweet water. Or maybe God made salt to rain? Or even better, most of the animals hibernated until few days before they came down from the Ark, so they just had to load food to survive enough time until the earth would flourish again, after landing from the Ark. Now let's analyze from where all that water could come from. Chapter 7, verses 19 and 20. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. In my country, Colombia, there is a small town called Lopez, which is considered the rainiest place on the planet. It has an annual precipitation rate of 12.9 meters. If the flood of 40 days could cover the highest mountain of the earth, the Everest, with 8,850 meters, it was required a precipitation 6,260 times bigger than the precipitation at the rainiest place on the planet. That implies that every minute of those 40 days, more than 470 tons of water fell over the Ark, an amount that no known wood could resist, being even worse for the joints between the planks, with the additional problem that the Ark would be permanently covered by water, with no chance to take the nose out to breathe. But the Ark construction is a point we ignored at the beginning of this video, and we will do it again. Not few people claim that all the necessary water for such an achievement emerged from the Earth's heart, but that version has a big problem. In order to move up the world's sea level almost 9 kilometers, we need 3.36 times more water than there is in total in the oceans, except if all the continents float permanently over the water. This additional water should be in crevices and small holes of the subsoil, and because of its volume, it would be stored huge depths down, subjected to high temperatures and pressures. It could be that stored there, it is in liquid state, but once free, it would transform into explosive vapor. Now, let's think about that amount of water released to the atmosphere in the form of super hot steam. The surface of the planet would simply have been sterilized. Other versions claim that the planet's orbit went through the tail of a comet. In that case, millions of ice meteorites would fall on the Earth, providing the additional water for the enormous flood. But this version has the same problem as the previous one. A lot of water would evaporate, hitting the planet to levels that would make life impossible on its surface. And even if we omit these problems, at the end of the flood we still have this question: where did the water go? If it returned to the Earth's heart, how did it get trapped there again? Or if it left the planet, how did it manage to escape without killing us all in the process? Chapter 6, verse 7. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. Both Christians and I agree that God, being a being who knows everything, cannot regret something he has done. Thus, in this verse there must be a misinterpretation or a wrong translation. But if it happens with this verse, could it happen to others? I don't find a reason to claim that it is the only error. What if we all have misinterpreted the flood? Chapter 7, verse 21. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl, and of cattle, and of beast, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. In this verse, we can interpret that what God wanted to eliminate was the life that breathes air, including us. But there is no punishment for life underwater. We can understand it more clearly with an example. Whales, dolphins, porpoises, seals, and in general all marine mammals. They are animals that live in water, but they need to breathe air. During the 40 days it rained copiously, they could not have breathed. So all those species had gone extinct, but now we have the blue whale roaming the oceans. The blue whale is such a big animal that with only the 2 specimens, male and female, the Ark had been filled. Not to mention the problem that would have been to put them in. This dilemma allows few options. 1. God made a global flood, but later he created many species again, triggering the next question: why didn't he create all life from zero? Or 2. God developed the flood only in the area in which humans were, which could not be in America or in Oceania, since these regions' natives have different languages, which they couldn't have got until centuries later in the Tower of Babel. What sense would it make to flood two continents if there wasn't any human presence? Chapter 7, verse 23. And every living substance was destroyed which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven. And they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. Under this new stance, several problems are solved. With a global flood, life would have been almost eradicated from the planet, including the oceans, but with a localized flood, all marine life would have been saved. It wouldn't be required impossible amounts of water. With the water we have here in the earth, it would be more than enough. The planetary climate wouldn't have changed so dramatically, and when they got off the ark, they could have found lands with vegetables and animal life that would serve as food. I would also say that being an amount of localized species, we wouldn't have problems with the endemic animals, with the viruses that, although they are not alive, they exist, and if they went through the flood, they would have become extinct. With the parasites who should travel inside their hosts in order to survive, with a method to get rid of all of that water once the flood was over. The ark wouldn't have to be so big. There wouldn't have been oxygen problems in it, and there would have been a much less sinking risk. Chapter 7, verse 4. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Chapter 7, verse 19. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. Chapter 6, verse 4. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. It is supposed that this story is captured in the Bible, by Moses himself, from visions and dreams. I wonder what he could have dreamed to know that the flood was planetary, if he never learned that the earth is a sphere floating in a vacuum. Couldn't he have misinterpreted everything? But the problems don't end here. We still have to solve, for example, how did all the races of the planet appear starting from a people? Where did all genetic diseases emerge from? So God decides to remake humanity because it was full of violence, but wasn't God who created that humanity and decided what it would be filled with? Why would God recreate life on the planet from lust, pedophilia, incest, and fornication to the max, if then he would punish such behavior? Finally, I would like to analyze a bit God's behavior, in order to understand why he would do things as it's told in the Bible. Chapter 5, verse 32. And Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Chapter 7, verse 6. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. Chapter 7, verse 16 and 17. Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. To sum up, God regretted creating the life that breathed air just as he had created it. But instead of making a blur and creating it again with a snap of his fingers, he ordered a 600-year-old man and his 3 100-year-old children and their respective wives of about 14 years to build a boat impossible to manufacture, to make a trip impossible to do, so God didn't have to do the creation of life from scratch. get a little more into God's mind. What was the reason God destroyed the earth? The Bible is quite ambiguous to define God's reason for the flood. In some verses, he says that it was the great violence scattered throughout the earth. In effect, life was very violent and is very violent, both to feed on and to reproduce. But wasn't God who decided that nature would be cruel, wild, and violent? In other verses, the Bible states that God was offended by how sinful we humans were. If sin means transgressing the law of God, I wonder what law we transgressed if God had not yet delivered his 10 commandments to Moses. In other verses, it is told how the angels were having offspring with human women, and God didn't like these resulting hybrids, so he decided to annihilate all humanity. But this position is also incongruous for several reasons. First, an average woman struggles to defend herself against a rapist of average size and weight. What possibilities would she have before an attacker twice her height and 4 times her weight? Being the victims, I don't understand why God wanted to punish them, if the births are usually painful. Wasn't enough punishment for women having to give birth to a giant baby? Second, what sin were the hybrid children committing at birth so that God would punish them? Third, the punishment that God imposed on men for being a bit more than spectators was to die by drowning. Couldn't this be described as a disproportionate sentence? Fourth, annihilating elephants, giraffes, lions, dogs, cats, cockroaches, flies, ants, etc. happened because the angels were also having sex with all these species? Fifth, God knows everything, so before it happened, he knew his beloved humans would do whatever they did to cause regret and hatch the genocide of the flood. I know, using this word with divine acts, how can it come to my mind? Easy. The meaning of genocide is the systematic extermination of a social group. With the flood, God exterminated systematically all social groups. But let's get back on track. God knew what would happen, but he decided not to do anything, not even to save the innocent. He could have put those who he no longer wanted to be alive permanently to sleep or disappear them. Instead, he preferred to spread pain, fear, and suffering for everybody. To conclude, let's read chapter 8, verses 20 and 21. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living, as I have done. God had killed at least hundreds of thousands of people, but he needed a Holocaust to feel satisfied. I think I don't need to spend words to express my opinion about how this story ends. I can only say that this is, in my opinion, the biggest hoax among the entire Bible. No matter how flexible and imaginative it is, this simply couldn't have happened in any way. Well, my friends, I really appreciate you saw the whole video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe and turn on the bell to be notified when we upload a new video. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.